this, and I'm going to give a quick introduction, and then we'll get started. This is the most formal it gets.
Okay.
So, my name is Sarah Milligan. I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the Oklahoma State University Library. Today I'm talking with Emmalie Green about her experience during the COVID-19 pandemic in Oklahoma. We'll be focusing most of our time discussing their time as a student, and also just some more general questions. So the interview for this project is going to be archived at the Oklahoma State University Library for future generations to see. And this project was supported through a grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services American Rescue Plan. Done. Okay. So let's start. Let's just tell me a little bit about yourself, like where are you from, and anything about just sort of like how you came to be today.
Sure. So I'm from McAllister, so about 2.5 hours from here, and at the start of the pandemic, I was going to be a senior in high school. So I was actually going to Kiowa High School at the time, and we were a state championship softball team. We were really on the road to win I believe it was our 4th state championship in slow pitch softball. And the season before, we had actually run-rolled every team at the state tournament. Mm-hmm. So it was, we were on the road. And then we got the call that, hey, we're going to extend some spring break time. We were like, okay, yeah, no worries, And then all of a sudden, school's canceled, your season's canceled, that's it. Mm-hmm. And I remember the seniors were just heartbroken, But so that was where I was whenever when COVID got really bad all of a sudden, because it seemed like one day it was fine and the next day it wasn't.
So you grew up in McAllister, mm-hmm. and then but you went to high school in Kiowa, which is not that unusual.
Yeah.
And so when you were, so in 2019-2020, that academic year, that mm-hmm. was did you say it was your senior year?
My junior year. So it was a spring semester my junior year. Right. So that fall, it was going to be my senior year.
Right. I'm just working on the chronology.
No, for sure. Well, and I'm having to think back too. It seems like so long ago,
Well, I think this is important. So let's talk a little bit about just like in general, as I do, like the softball part, I do think is like super important mm-hmm. because sports has been such a big process of like how like schools and have had to like renegotiate all this space, right?
Yes.
And sports is such a big deal in high schools.
Yes, absolutely. Such a small school. That's all there is.
That's what you do. So if you were your junior year, so like you went to spring break. So let me ask you this, because mm-hmm. I think as a teenager, because at that time you would have been 17.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a teenager at that point, like, were you aware that there were these sort of like larger news conversations about this like virus or were you just?
Well, I kind of feel like my situation was a little bit weird because my mom is a nurse practitioner. And at the time she still owned a clinic in McAllister. And so she was getting information that wasn't being really talked about on the news. And it wasn't necessarily that she was like getting things first. It was just like I was hearing different things from her than on the news. And my dad is in law enforcement. And so he also is, he's on Fox News constantly and things like that. And that's on all the time in our house. And I've made it a point in high school in general and in college to watch the news because I feel like it's important to stay caught up on everything. And so at the time, I was very much in tune with the news. But it was really difficult because I was hearing two different things, which is a common denominator with COVID,
Mm-hmm. So what were the two different things you were hearing and who were they coming from?
So my mom was freaking out. She, was saying, this is really bad. We are not leaving the house. We are wearing masks. We are sanitizing groceries. If we had a whole system it was crazy looking back.
So was that like after shutdown?
I would say
sort of leading up to
that started probably the week after spring break. Okay. So really it was before even Kiowa said, hey, we're done for, until further notice,
Mm-hmm.
And so I was hearing that, and, I have my friends going, this is stupid, nothing's happening, because nobody really knew what was happening. Honestly, I mean, even my mom didn't, looking back, but I trusted her as a nurse practitioner. I trust her still entirely to this day. And so I was like, I'm going to listen to you. I was terrified because I was thinking, we're going to have to wipe down every grocery we have. I was scared to go get packages out of the mailbox. I was terrified. I thought, and I'm seeing on the news, it's killing teenagers, kids, old people. It didn't matter. It wasn't targeting really a certain person or, male or female or teenager or older. It was just everybody was dying. And I was like, oh my, it was awful.
Yeah.
But then, my dad, kind of leaned toward the side of, I'm not sure, and we certainly didn't want to be over the top because I also have a 13-year-old sister who was a couple years younger at the time, and we didn't want to scare her, and so it was kind of a thing of staying calm, while also doing the right thing and being smart,
Yeah. So did you, what job does your dad have in law enforcement?
So he's basically in the federal side of things.
Okay.
I don't really like to specify exactly what, but
You don't have to.
he's higher up, I'll just say that,
Okay.
than like a cop, for example.
That helps.
And so he was getting some information on his end that wasn't necessarily related to what my mom was getting, but when you think about COVID, is it government related? Is it not? And so it was honestly to the point within probably that first month where we were hardcore quarantining, two completely different perspectives in the same house. And so it was who do I believe? I mean, I was 17. I don't know anything about it. I was going to be a pre-med major, but I was I don't know. I don't know anything about virology or how this works. And so, yeah, very different perspectives and different jobs,
So school was closed for spring break, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you go somewhere or did you stay home?
No, nope. As soon as it was closed for spring break, my mom had already been saying things are about to get bad. And she definitely predicted the whole quarantine thing. She said, it's going to shut down. Everything's going to, and so whenever they said, okay, we're going to extend spring break another week, she was like, this is it. You're not going back to school. And I was like, whatever. And then sure enough, she was right on the money. It was school's done until further notice, not even to the summer or till next semester. It was just well, we don't really know.
Yeah.
But we did not leave the house after that. And no joke, I mean, I literally didn't go anywhere for months.
So how was that when you flipped? So when the school was okay, we're staying for a week, right? And then it just, they came back and said, okay, we're flipping to virtual. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
Well, actually, no. For a while, they just said, until further notice, we're going to figure something out. And I feel like every school around that area kind of did the same thing because small schools tend to not have the technology that these bigger schools do. And so we didn't have all of these things at our fingertips. And I didn't really know how to use Zoom or anything. I had never really used that up until that point because I didn't need to. So it was kind of a process of how do we get through to kids? How do we make this a good learning process?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was definitely a solid, I want to say month or 2 months where there was no instruction at all.
So just out. So that's from mid-March until mid-May.
I feel like I believe they actually sent out a thing being okay, summer's early, kind of, trying to defer from the scariness of it. But,
So, do you remember much about their communication with you from a student's perspective?
No, I feel like they were more to the parents. I don't really remember getting a lot of text. I was also involved in KTC. I was doing a biomed program.
What's KTC?
Oh, so sorry. It's Kaiamishi Technology Center, so VOTech basically, and I was doing a pre-med program type of thing. So I was also getting instruction from them, and they were really good about communicating with me. But as far as my actual high school, they were to the parents. I did not get any emails or texts or anything, which is fine. I mean, I was 17, so I mean, I wasn't mad about it, but
Yeah. So, did you actually go back to school then? I guess it's not, I'm not 100% clear. Did you actually go back to school?
So basically what I did was I did some online school for my pre-med program, but for Kiowa I did not. And then actually my senior year, I decided to transfer to Owasso High School. And so at that time, they were offering you could either go in person or you could go like online and do like Zooms. And because I was playing ball, I decided to do online because I didn't want to get quarantined. So that was the route that I took with it, and that was kind of more of a like personal, like I was a starter, so I was like I'm not going to get sat down for 2 weeks because that's like a third of your season, you know. But I actually never went back to Kiowa after that.
So there's a lot packed in there I want to pull back from a little bit too, right? So you talked about the fact that you were like a softball player, like that. The sports was a big part.
Yes, it was huge at the time. Yes.
So it sounds like that was a part of your decision on like what you were going to do your senior year.
Yes,
revolved around.
It definitely was. A 90% of it had to do with that. Absolutely.
So talk me through the thought process for that, because that's I would never think, I live in McAllister, right. I have been going to Kiowa, but I'm going to do virtual online learning in Owasso. Like, talk me through how that process happened.
And I don't care at all to talk about this, but it really kind of stemmed from things that were going on before COVID hit. I wasn't enjoying myself very much, and I was very out of place. I belonged somewhere much bigger that had a lot more opportunity. I'm involved in music very heavily as well. So people were always like, dude, what are you doing in Kiowa? You know?
Maybe you should give a frame of reference for like what a graduating class number in Kiowa is.
Oh gosh, probably like 20 something, like maybe 25. And at Owasso, we had like close to 1,000.
Yeah.
So
are you okay to say like why you chose to go to Kiowa?
Sure. So I went to Frank Chambers. First through 8th grade, loved it.
Which is a pretty small rural school.
Absolutely. Very, very small school, very homegrown. I loved it. Had a great experience. And I was at the time playing softball with Kiowa girls on a competitive team, and we were really good. And they were begging me. They were like, dude, you're about to graduate. Where are you going to go? And they basically convinced me to come to Kiowa. That was really our thing. Now, we also knew that their schooling and everything was great. We heard nothing but good things, really. So it was like, we already know these girls. You want to play ball with them? What, like, perfect, situation. So that was really what, like, convinced me to go to Kiowa, was just because everything kind of fell into place that way. And I knew, like, the whole team. Like, it was literally the team of, Kiowa that I was playing with already, so.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So leading into that year, you were already kind of rethinking maybe the school felt too small for you.
Yes.
And so when you came to like summer 2020, and it sounds like that you're at home, you were like you all were being very cautious, it sounds like.
Yeah.
To not go out and like spread contagion or just being cautious with what the sort of federal guidelines were saying to do. So, like, you're thinking through what am I going to do? Help me understand, like, from your perspective, like, who was helping you make those decisions? Where were you getting your information?
Yeah, so my mom knew that I was very unhappy at the time. I was just struggling because I felt like I wasn't able to, spread as far as I could go, as far as, like, with music and everything. I was actually going to a place called School of Rock in Tulsa twice a week after softball practice. Looking back, I honestly don't know how I did that. I really don't. But I was obsessed with it, and I was so involved in music, and Kiowa was not giving me that at all. And I don't think it's their fault. They're just very small, and they're just about sports. Like, that's how they've always been, and that's totally fine because they're successful in it. But for somebody who doesn't confine to the social norms of, I'm just going to play ball, like, that didn't work for me. So I told my mom, I was like, Mom, I'm just struggling. And I honestly was thinking about quitting softball my senior year and trying to focus more on other things. And she begged me not to. And I was a starter, so I mean, it wasn't like I was this terrible player and it wouldn't have mattered, And so I talked to her a lot about it, and she said, and I'll never forget, we were sitting on the back porch, and she said, well, let's move. And I said, what? And she said, let's move. And we were very thankful because we had the ability to do that, but it was, we often say that was God's plan, because we found a house in Owasso that was 5 minutes from the high school. within a couple weeks of looking. The softball coach found out that I was coming, and he was amazing. He was so welcoming, and called me and said, "You need to get down here, start practicing." And so it all fell into place very easily in a time of like a lot of uncertainty. And so for me, being a Christian, I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. But my mom was probably the biggest factor in that, because she was the one that was like, I know how unhappy you are, and I don't know what to do about it because you're not quitting ball. And I was like, well, what do we do? You know? And so for her, I think it was like, this is a last resort. And my sister was also not very happy. And so she said, you know what, let's just change. I mean, it's a couple hours away. We'll see how we like it. And it was an amazing experience. It was amazing. I mean, I can't say enough good about Owasso. I seriously loved it. It was an amazing school, staff, everything.
So, that's a huge change. Did the whole household pick up with you and go?
No, so my dad was unable to move with us, which was very, very hard because me and my dad are very, very close. And he is musical as well. So that was the way that we bonded a lot. We have a whole room at the house with guitars and, amps and everything else. And so with his job, he was not able to move. And there was actually quite a bit of tension in our house at the time, which wasn't a good mixture with already being, quarantined and everything. And, he said, you know what, I want you to be happy. Like, do what you want to do. And so that was really hard, but on the weekends we would drive back down to McAllister, stay at the house there, and we kept the house in Owasso for a little over a year, and we ended up selling it after I graduated, and my sister moved schools. She's going to McAllister now. She's very happy, and coincidentally I am in college now, so it works out, but it was kind of like a 1-year thing. Which was crazy, because we are not the type of family to just do rash stuff like that. But, things happen.
Well, and I think that's part of it is, did you have the option in Kiowa to do virtual schooling if you wanted to?
They ended up giving that option, but they were very, very quick to go back to in-person compared to most schools. And I do think that has a lot to do with the social environment and the political environment. And whenever you go to a small school, you're in a small town, a lot of people were thinking this isn't real or this isn't as bad as we thought. Regardless of what it was at the time, my mom was terrified to send us to school. My sister also has asthma. So I thought, and I just kept thinking, if I bring that home to her, I will never forgive myself. Like, I will literally, and my dad also has some respiratory stuff as well. So thankfully I do not, but my thought process was not, I'm scared to get it. I was thinking, I don't want to give it to somebody that I love whenever we don't know anything about it and there's no treatment. So at the time for us, it was like, we are not going to school, at least without no masks, because at the time that's what we were trusting. Again, I was listening to my mom fully as a nurse practitioner. I trust her and she's very good at what she does. So I said, you know what, I'll do what you want me to do. I just want to be safe and keep each other safe.
So with all of that in mind, can you remember the first time you put on a mask to go out somewhere public?
Oh goodness. Well, because my mom was a nurse practitioner during flu season, if I stepped foot in her clinic, I had a mask on. So I kind of knew the whole situation of, hey, stuff's going around, put a mask on your face. And I also knew surgeons wear masks to operate. Doctors wear masks when they come in to see sick kids. I knew the gist of it. But I think the first time that I actually wore a mask was before I transferred to Owasso. I went to an athletic meeting at Kiowa. And I walked in that gym and I was the only one wearing one. And it was like this bright, I want to say it was a KN95 because my mom had access to those at the time. Yeah. And it was just so obvious, And I'll never forget the embarrassment that I felt because not a single person, and this was whenever they were shutting things down and they had one meeting to discuss what we were going to do for sports, because that's all that Kiowa really is. And it's great, but they had to figure something out. So I'm there and we had already talked about moving, but it wasn't set. So I was like, I'm going to go to the meeting because if I don't show up, it's going to be like, what's going on, So I show up and I keep that mask on my face the whole time. And just thinking about it just makes me embarrassed because everybody was looking at me and everybody's thinking, look at this idiot wearing a mask. you know. And whatever the mask thing is, you know, I mean, I don't even like to get into that. But at the time, I was doing what my mom told me to do. And I trust my mom because of what she does. And I do think that there's some truth to it in certain areas. So, you know, that was probably the first time that I really was like, okay, this is happening. Like, if I'm going to go outside, I have a mask on my face.
Did anyone say anything to you, or?
No, I don't remember anybody saying anything, but just the looks. I had to walk past, like, bleachers full of high school students. I was senior. And it was just, I mean, the eyes you could feel, and even the teachers were, like, looking at me, and I was like, wow, okay. And, like, I mean, rightfully so, to be honest. I mean, there's a big white thing on my face. I would probably look, too, for a second. Maybe not stare, but, you know, I was just like, oh, my gosh. And I thought about taking it off, and I thought, but what if I get it and give it to my sister? That was my main thought the whole time, was my sister. I was thinking, if I give that to her, because I was embarrassed, like, what kind of sister is that, you know? I mean...
So was that really what you feel like the first time you'd gone someplace public since the school had shut down in, like, March?
I really think that was the first time I'd gone out of the house. And my mom didn't want me to go. But I was like, Mom, I can't not show up to that. Like, that would be bad. Because I was a starter. I was going to start my senior year. So it was like, can't do that.
So how did that play into, or did it play into your decision to go to Owasso then?
Well, you know, I just kind of kept my mouth shut, honestly. They said, all right, we're going to go clean out the field house and everything. And I skedaddled out early. And that next week, I believe, was whenever we went in and talked to the principal, got all my stuff transferred, gave my uniform to my coach, and said, see you later. So, I mean, it was something that none of the girls knew about. And I really didn't know another way to tell them other than I'm just going to leave. And I think that was the best thing to do versus trying to talk to them about it. And they knew that I wasn't happy either. So it was kind of a elephant in the room, like, how much is it going to take for me to leave? And we had some parents beg us not to go, and we were like, no, we're going to do this. And it really was something that we prayed a lot about, because it was a lot. It wasn't just about softball. It's about me being involved as much as I could in music. And I was not getting that in McAllister in general. It's a small town, and it's just not very music-oriented, honestly. And that's sad to me, but it's just not. And so it was a hard thing to do. I felt bad because I was like, I've won state championships with these girls. I mean, we've had some hard practices together. I mean, I've grown up with them. But I also thought, you know, I got to quit thinking about other people right now. And I think also that time of COVID where I had so much time to think, whenever everything just stopped and I had all that time, I really thought, like, why are you continuing to be unhappy whenever you have the option to not be? Like, what, like, who are you doing it for, you know? So it was a lot of soul searching, but I feel like COVID did give me that, the ability to just go, okay, take a step back and look at your life right now because you're a senior already, you know?
So then let's talk a little bit. You said when you went to Owasso. So Owasso is very big in comparison.
6A. Yeah. So Kiowa is Class B.
Yeah.
Owasso is 6A.
Right.
So huge.
Thank you for that. I knew there was a big difference.
Yes. Literally like the biggest you could have.
So that's not only a big difference in the amount of people. I mean, you said that you were doing virtual classes. So maybe let's talk about, like, transitioning from doing everything sort of in person with school to, like, this virtual learning situation.
Sure.
And then we can talk a little bit about the switch to, like, sports and that.
Yeah. So it was actually really awesome because Owasso, whenever I came in, you know, they were like, hey, this is what's going on. You're more than welcome to choose. In my junior year, I had taken some pretty hard classes. I really loaded up on classes. So I thought, you know what? I'm moving senior year. I'm just going to take some easy classes. And really, I had everything I needed to graduate, but they wouldn't allow me to just not take any classes, which is totally valid because I was playing ball. So I actually did a thing called Ingenuity, which is basically where you don't do Zoom meetings. You just are responsible for work by the time that the semester ends. So there's really not a lot of, like, due dates or anything. I mean, it's very easy to get behind because of that. But it was very lenient for the situation. I was really thankful for it because as I was playing ball and everything, I mean, if I had to leave at noon that day, I didn't have to be on a Zoom meeting, you know, or something like that. So I actually did Zoom for the first 2 weeks at Owasso, and then I transferred to Ingenuity, just because I believe that was a requirement that you did that. But it worked amazing. It was a really good program.
So how did they communicate out to you about all that? Like, were you assigned a teacher to help keep track, or was it basically like a virtual academy?
Yeah. So I had a advisor assigned to me, but it was mostly just an online academy. We had an email for Owasso that if they were like, hey, make sure that this is done before this date, or here's important dates you need to know for the high school. But I also feel like being involved with the softball team gave me that ability to be in person for some things. So I did hear about a lot of the high school events through softball. So I'm sure for somebody who wasn't involved in sports or something else like extra, it was probably harder to figure out what was going on with like graduation and things like that. But I do feel like they communicated pretty well overall. So
what you mentioned that you had to go in person for the first 2 weeks?
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Well, I say in person. It was more like you had to be on the Zoom meeting, like on a camera, like with a teacher. And then eventually they were like, okay, if you want to do online, like, and you want to stay there, then you're going to go to Ingenuity, where you don't do Zoom meetings. And the teachers, like, they were from Owasso, but they weren't giving out the assignments. So it was like everybody in Oklahoma that was doing Ingenuity was doing the same thing in the classes, but they had a teacher assigned to each class to just put in the grades. So basically it was just a requirement, like, hey, you got to get on Zoom. We got to make sure that you're like a person, basically, and then after that, if you want to continue to be online, totally fine. They were really easygoing about that too. Like, they weren't pressuring about, oh, you need to be in person or whatever. They were really like, hey, it's your decision, go for it. And if you went in person, you had to wear a mask, which was fine. But it was a really good experience. They really did a good job, I think.
So how did they communicate that out at the beginning, like before the semester? Because I know generally, like leading up, like you're looking at the end of July,
Mm-hmm.
there was still this question of like what school is going to look like.
Right. Yeah. So for me, because I transferred in, I was just told by my advisor what was going on. I actually had like a meeting with her, and with my mom and her, and we walked around the school, and she kind of told me what was going on, and so I don't really know if my experience was the same as everybody else's,
Mm-hmm.
as far as if they were already at Owasso.
Yeah.
Again, they were really good with emails, so I feel like they probably were pretty good about communicating. But for me, I was able to actually talk to somebody face to face, which was awesome.
Yeah.
With masks on, of course. But they communicated well.
So was there a conversation about, I guess talk to me about the sports side of things.
Sure.
Because it seems like, there's this thing about you're choosing to do all virtual,
Mm-hmm.
but, like sports still have to be in person. And I know
Right.
there, to some degree, some places there's been this tension.
Yes, absolutely. There was definitely some of that at Owasso. And the thing is like softball's outside. So that was a really big factor for us. And that was why we didn't get shut down. Was because we were like, well, we're outside, the wind's blowing, We also wore gaiters, so we all bought a gaiter. It was required if you were in the field house, as soon as you stepped on the field, that gaiter was on your face. Coaches were really specific and really hardcore about that. They were like, if that is not on your face, you're going to be the reason that we get shut down. And we ended up getting state runner-up that year. So we were expected to be at least in the in state, So we were like, we're not going to be the reason that we get shut down. And a lot of people did get shut down, and it wasn't even their fault. So, it was kind of scary because week to week, we just didn't know. But we did everything in our power and what we were told to do by, CDC and everything. So we kept the gaiter on. We stayed outside. We didn't hang out in the field house, trying to show like, hey, we're trying to stay spread apart. The coaches, they would modify the drills so we'd be more spread apart. They really did a good job. They were like, we are not getting shut down, and we didn't. And I honestly can't believe we didn't, because we had teams next to us that we had just played. Oh, they're shut down. They're shut down. They're shut down. And it's just, it was
usually
so scary.
What that means is, explain like what it means to shut something down.
So basically it just means that, and it depended on the time, because for a while it was 2 weeks you couldn't play ball. So if you think about 2 weeks in a softball season in high school, I mean, that's like a third of your season.
So is that like if one person on the team tested positive with COVID,
yes.
the whole team?
And I think they really tried to do like contact tracing, but you got to think like even though we're outside, we still go in a field house together. We still have a changing room together. Like, I mean, it's going to be impossible for us not to be all, and dugouts. We are outside, but we're kind of close together. So from what I remember, it was 2 weeks from exposure, and usually it was pretty much the whole team, or it would always be like their ace pitcher or their 4-hole hitter or somebody like that. So it was always a hard blow either way.
So do you remember talking with your teammates about like your life outside of the field? Because that seems to me that that plays a part.
For a long time, actually for the whole fast pitch season, I really didn't. I didn't tell them anything about Kiowa. I didn't tell them where I was from. I didn't tell them I was involved in music because I wanted no pity. I wanted no preconceived notions of me. I just wanted to go out there and show them what I could do physically, and also as a teammate and as a senior as well, being in that leadership role. So I didn't want them to know anything about me really, so I kept it very quiet. And even at times my coach would be like, so tell me about this, and I'd be like, wait till the season's over. Mm-hmm. Because there was just a lot to unfold there, and I did not want any, again, pity or preconceived notions. I just wanted to go out there and play ball.
Well, it seems like with COVID, I mean, like what you do outside in your free time, is going to impact what happens to you on the field to a certain degree in a different way. So did you all talk about that some as well?
I mean, we talked about how bored we were at home and how hard it was. And, I remember, a lot being a senior going, put your mask on, thinking, don't be the reason that we get quarantined, and it was hard. I mean, we're out in the heat in Oklahoma, with masks on our face on the softball field. I mean, that is very difficult, But as far as talking about what we did at home, nobody did anything. Like, our life was softball, and that's it. And really, the starting 9 basically had an agreement to go online because we were like, we are not going to be the reason that we get quarantined. We're going to do everything in our power to not get exposed, because if you were in class, contact tracing, you're sitting next to this person who was exposed to this person, so you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was getting crazy with the contact tracing. So we were like, we're done with that. Stay online until the season's over. And it worked out, thankfully. So
that was the end of the season is generally
October, 1st of October. I want to say the 5th or 6th was when state championship was. I want to say the 6th, but I'm not 100% on that.
I knew it was
time
period. But
yeah.
Wanted to make sure.
Yes.
So I mean, all of that is a really big change in lots of ways. So, I mean, did you stay online that whole year then, even after softball was over?
Yep.
So what played a factor in that?
Honestly, I kind of got in a rhythm of doing it, and it was really easy because also I was taking easy classes that were just kind of, didn't really matter, but I had to fill out my schedule as a senior. Mm-hmm. And, I was really enjoying time with my family at home. I was also able to drive home to see my dad and my dogs more down in McAllister. So I was like, you know what? It gives me more flexibility. I was able to go and work out and do things just more flexible time, Mm-hmm. So it made it easier as a senior. And as things started to lighten up a little bit, as far as, I was still required to wear a mask in places, but I was able to go places in general. And so, I just felt like I had a little bit more freedom, and I was able to take that opportunities. You know what? Rest before college, because it's about to get hard, So
was your sibling doing online classes
yes,
as well?
She was. She enjoyed it. She really enjoys being at home, which I admire, because I'm somebody that I have trouble doing nothing for a while. I'm somebody that needs to be doing something all the time, and she definitely likes being at home. So she took that opportunity too. And my mom actually, talked to me about it. She said, do you think that this is a good idea? Mm-hmm. And I said, I think it's fine for right now, because I knew that we weren't going to stay online. I knew that it couldn't continue to be that way, because it was going to eventually be harmful to the learning process. And she was in 5th grade or 6th grade. So, not a good time to be online for a long time, but she enjoyed it. So I'm glad she got to do it.
what about, I mean, you talked a little bit about being able to, as the year went on, it sounds like, you know, you were able to sort of like get out and about as long as, so who was sort of saying as long as you're wearing a mask or
My
whatever?
mom. Okay. And, you know, I won't lie, me and my mom butted heads a lot during that time because as more things started to come out, I had a hard time believing what she was saying. And
where were you getting your information about when more things were coming out?
The news.
But what?
Like Fox News was our main one that we watched. I was also talking to my dad, and he's saying, "Well, I'm going to work, and I'm not wearing a mask, and I'm not sick." And I'm like, "Well, he is in law enforcement, and he's fine." You know, so I mean, I was hearing things from my dad, and not that he didn't care. It's just one of those things where people have very different outlooks on it, and in a time when numbers were going down, and where things were getting a little bit better. And my mom was like, "Don't speak too soon, you know, because things will spike again."
Was this before or after the vaccine came out?
Before. This was, yeah.
So like fall and early winter.
Yes, yeah. And so my dad was actually one of the first people to get the vaccine because he was in law enforcement, first responder. So it just created a lot of tension in my house, and I admire my mom and my dad both very much in very different ways. And so whenever you're faced with the fact that they have very different outlooks and you're 17, 18 years old, what do you believe? I mean, and then I'm on social media. Well, you can't believe that, and I knew that. But then I'm watching Fox News, which I've watched all my life, and I'm not sure what to believe. My mom's telling me, "Oh my gosh, you cannot go without a mask," and my dad's going, "Emily, you're fine. Go without a mask." And so it was one of those things where I don't know who to believe because my mom is a nurse practitioner, but my dad is out working. My mom was not working at the time. So that was the difference, was like my dad was doing fine. And, you know, I knew a lot of other people that were doing fine as well. You know, my friends were going out without masks and things like that. And I'm like, well, you know, when is enough enough, you know? And it wasn't just that. It was also, you know, not going to certain places, you know, not going inside to eat. What was a big thing. I could only get takeout for a while. I mean, it was just things that were impacting like my social life especially. And as somebody who is a social butterfly for sure, it was really hard to just keep on with it. At first, I was so scared that I just did what I was told. But then as time went on and I went through a whole softball season, I never got sick. My family did not get sick. And I thought, okay, I mean, how bad is this really? You know, because it just didn't hit us, thankfully.
So, did you know other people who got COVID then?
Yeah, I had a teammate, I remember, who tested positive, and she just was really tired. But other than that, she didn't really have any symptoms, and I'm going, okay, well, she's a healthy 18-year-old, you know, like me. And so it was almost like I was comparing it in a way of, okay, well, I'll be fine. Instead of going, oh, hey, she tested positive. Yeah. And looking back, I don't really know if that was the right mindset or not. I just think it was a lot of information was being thrown at me at an 18-year-old kid who doesn't know anything really about virology or how this virus works. So it's like, you know, who do you believe? Yeah. It was very hard.
So you mentioned like your junior year, you're going to Kaimishi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Technical college.
Yeah.
And which is not in the same region as Owasso.
No.
For someone who doesn't know
no.
Like it's just southeastern Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And so like, is that something that you stopped doing your senior year?
Yeah, and my teacher, she was so sad. She was like, oh my gosh, don't leave. Because it was really a 2-year program. So I completed Biomed 1, but there was Biomed 2 as well. And I wanted to really bad. And there was an opportunity to do something very similar up in Owasso, but I talked to a girl that I knew who actually was involved in it, and she was like, I don't think you're going to like this. I think that you should just stick to doing what you're doing now. And it ended up working great. So I think that was God's plan for sure. Mm-hmm. But it was definitely still on my radar. Like I was dead set on going to medical school since the 7th grade. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was something that I was like, I'm going to take this opportunity to learn, but I'm also like, I don't know anything about this. What am I going to learn? You know? Yeah. And nobody really knew, you know? It was like new stuff was coming out every week.
Yeah.
So
what about like holidays and things like that? Does that change the way that you had family gatherings or you celebrated Christmas, for example?
Yes. I didn't see my grandma and granny for a long time, and they live about 5 minutes from us. And
in McAllister?
Yes, and in McAllister, yeah. Because after school had ended, especially, I mean, it was just, they are both high-risk people as far as getting sick. And, we definitely didn't go to, I believe there was a family reunion or something that we didn't go to. I didn't see a lot of my family as much because either they didn't want to wear masks or we just didn't want to get them sick because I was playing ball, and we weren't staying home religiously like all the time.
Yeah.
And so we were like, one droplet could cause it, So it was like,
yeah.
I definitely, there was a good period there for a couple months where I just didn't see a lot of family outside of my home, which was hard.
So you've mentioned religion some. So did you all actively have like a church community at that time?
We got super involved in the live streaming. I did especially. It was kind of a thing that we kind of worked out on our own, as crazy as that sounds. It was really easy to get in a rhythm where we weren't getting on the live stream. But I found myself getting a lot of anxiety being inside all the time. Again, I was going to School of Rock 2 or 3 times a week, softball practice every day after school. I was booked from the time I got up to the time I went to bed. And so to have all of that stripped away from me all of a sudden, it was a very anxious time for me. I'm a very going person. I like to be busy. So I definitely turned to my faith in that. And I also used it to make sense of what was going on, But for me, I started getting in a routine of every Sunday morning live stream was on. And even if I didn't want to get up, I made it a point.
Do you remember when your church started doing that? Like, do you remember like how that first started?
Yeah, it actually, there was a couple weeks where, in that time period where spring break had been extended and everything, where nothing was really going on. And where a lot of people were still going to church because I felt like the whole school thing was happening earlier than the whole community. It was like the whole community wasn't doing anything, but the schools were going online. And I was like, I'm so confused. Like, what good does this do? As a town, as a small town, So, I felt like there was a period there where we were like, well, we're not going to go to church. Not happening. Just a big old group of people. That was a no. But I was like, well, we need to be in church. Like, I need that. So eventually they started doing the live streaming and it was pretty quick. I'd say within a couple weeks they were on the money with it, which I was really thankful for.
And how big was your church?
The one that I actually was watching wasn't the one that we had been going to because they took a lot longer. But it was Life Church that I watched. And I would say like 3 weeks they were doing it. But they are great about technology and, they're high tech,
So was there anything coming from that avenue about, like how to interact and how to interpret COVID? Because I know a lot.
Absolutely there was, yes.
Okay.
I knew a lot of people, a lot of family members that were going, when it's your time to go, it's your time to go. I believe that 100%. I 100% believe that I could do everything I could to prevent getting COVID and something bad happened to me the next day that's totally random. I do believe in God's plan and God's will for me and my life and when I'm supposed to go. So it was really hard, but I started to think about a different perspective of, okay, well, why is God allowing my mom to go to college and then to be a nurse practitioner later on if it doesn't really matter if we get treatment or not? And why do doctors go to medical school if, well, it isn't going to matter, or if he doesn't want us to have medicine or to be treated? And so there's a lot of gray area, I feel like, and a lot of like technicalities that depending on the way that you look at things and the way that you look at your religion, even Christianity in general, you may not think that way. But I just thought about, if God's will for my mom was to be a nurse practitioner, then it wouldn't make sense for us to go, well, I'm just going to go out there and, go to the most crowded place possible and hope that I don't get COVID and die within the next 2 weeks. Because I just feel like that's very irrational. And I feel like God gave us a sound mind and a sound heart. And so with that, I thought, I'm going to be rational. I'm going to protect myself and my family and pray about it. And, I pray, Lord, if this isn't what you want me to be doing, let me know. And I never really got that push of, hey, stop being scared. And it wasn't, I didn't want to be fearful, but I wanted to be rational and logical at the same time. And that's where a lot of gray area was, especially for Christians, I feel like. And I had a lot of family going, you're being ridiculous. You guys are way over the top. Family who was also involved in healthcare as well We have a lot of healthcare in our family. So it was really crazy in our family specifically, but in the church, I heard some sermons going, you know what? God doesn't want us to be afraid. There's a lot of sin on this earth. There's a lot of bad things going on. It's earth,
Yeah.
But I just think about the Bible verses that talk about giving us a spirit of love and of a sound mind and of a sound heart. And I just feel like being rational and logical and protecting my family, knowing that I can and that I have the ability to, was the best thing for me.
So, am I understanding correctly that some of the sermons, like from the pulpit, were as much geared towards
no masks, no vaccine. God decides when you go.
Okay.
And you shouldn't be afraid of this as much as you shouldn't be afraid of the flu or getting in a car accident or, something like that.
So were people still going to physical church at that point?
Oh, yes. And especially in McAllister, it was something we talked about often. Not that it was either way. It was just like, it's interesting to see where the divides happen. And I'm not going to lie, at a first glance, I never expected it to be in the church. But it was a good opportunity for me to look at the scripture too, and look back to that. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to quit asking my mom and dad questions and look at the word instead. And that's where I was like, this is what I'm doing. Like, I don't even care what my mom and dad say about it. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm going to refer to. Here's my evidence. And if you think it's factual or not, well, not my problem, So it was really weird, though. It was really strange because normally our church is so unified, and it became so divided so quickly.
So you were watching live church. That's not your home church, is what I'm hearing. So did your home church?
my home church was very on the side of like, COVID is either not real or which. They weren't as big on that as just like, you need to quit being afraid. This is stupid.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be in church, And for me, I was like, you know what? You can make any day your own service if you make it. And so that I made it a point to, get on the live stream and look at my Bible and take notes and really try to take things from it. It was hard not being in person. I love being in person. I sang in church a lot too, but before COVID. So It was hard. But especially the church that we were going to, they referred to some things that were, we weren't agreeing with. And it was just about COVID in general. It wasn't really about Christianity. It was just, how do we look at this from a perspective of what God would want to do?
Mm-hmm.
And it was either don't be fearful or let's not be idiots.
Yeah.
And
just because I think it's helped clarifying context for things
Sure.
down the road. Life Church, I think, is pretty much considered non-denominational Christian, correct?
Yes.
Protestant Christian.
Yes. Yeah. They're pretty just like non-denominational from what I've taken away from it. I was going to a Baptist church before that. So I got a very similar vibe from that. And that's why I liked it. We've gone to Life a few times here and there. So I was like, I'm just going to watch them because they do a really good job with the live streams. And I was like, I just want to be able to get on it, and that was a tricky thing in itself. But they were very just like, we're reading from the Bible. Like, that's it. Like, we're not going to talk about the different subcategories and all this. We're just going to talk about God and what we can do during this time of anxiety and depression for some people and just stress, and fear,
So thinking through all of that information, I think this is really important because it's talking about being a young person and having to figure out this just mass bombardment of information.
Yeah.
Right. And I know you talked a little bit about like Fox News being really, central in your home.
Yes, absolutely.
But that's sort of this national landscape. Were you getting local news anyway? Were you hearing about hospital surges and things like that, or
anything to do with the hospital? Especially my mom was hearing about because she knows a ton of people from the hospital in McAllister. She knows every clinic and the people there because it is such a small town. So things like that, my mom was getting some news on, which was helpful. But as far as just in general about CDC, what they're saying, what the world's going to do, what schools are going to do, it was Fox News. That was really our main source. And then my dad would come in and say, here's what's going on. Fox News is saying this. And we'd be like, okay.
So did that feel like a secure place to get information from?
It did at the time because, again, I can remember being a little girl and seeing Fox News on the TV. It's always been on in our house. And so, but I also knew being in high school, learning about here's what to trust, here's not, I thought the news is about to get really unreliable because nobody knows what's going on. And so to sit here and watch a, right-winged news station talk about COVID, I started to not trust them fairly quickly, but at first, within that, the first couple months, I was like, yeah, I like Fox News. I'll listen to it.
I understand some of that isn't, all of that is in retrospect, right? Like it's easier to look backwards and think through some of those things than when you're in day to day.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So let's talk a little bit about, like you mentioned that your dad was one of the earliest people to get the vaccine.
Yes.
Do you remember conversations either in the community or in your household or, like your own perspective, like the vaccine's coming?
Yeah.
So what happened?
So I remember my mom saying, hey, they're making a vaccine. And I remember just being really excited because I know that the United States has the best technology in the world, the best medical professionals in the world. I mean, we are an amazing country when it comes to medicine and, So I was excited, but then I started thinking, I was like, how long did they take to make this vaccine? And my mom was like, oh, well, it's been so many months. I'm like, months? We're putting that in our bodies? And she's like, we don't have another choice. I'm like, okay. And that was all it took for me to convince me. But my dad did not want to get it. He was terrified. He said, I'm doing this so I can work. Because at the time my mom was not working. They had just closed their clinic. And she was like, you know what? I'm going to stay home with you guys. I don't want y'all to be home alone, during this weird time. So we were very fortunate to have that. A lot of families did not have that. And looking back, I'm like, wow, thank goodness, for us. I mean, I can't imagine not having a parent there. But my dad just had a different outlook on everything. And he said, I don't want to put that in my body when we have had it for a couple months. And I was like, well, it's either that or don't go to work. And he was like, yeah, I'm getting the vaccine. So he got the first shot and he was fine. And then eventually he got the second shot and he had some pretty bad side effects from it. And it scared me really bad. I was terrified. I was like, oh my gosh. Like I prayed. I prayed all day. Like the first day he had a fever and everything. I thought, oh my gosh, like what's happening? And we're a vaccinated family. We usually get the flu shot. We have all of our childhood vaccines. So it was scary. I was really scared for my dad, especially because me and my mom and my sister, we didn't get the vaccine for a while after that because it wasn't available yet. Because it was first responders and then, older people and then so on. So we got it way farther down the road when more research could be done. And my dad got it like straight out of the lab,
Yeah.
So yeah, it was.
So did you have a sense of like, okay, this vaccine is available now?
Yeah.
Life is going to change, or it's just this thing that maybe we could, like, do you remember like whether there was a general sense of how that was going to impact or not at all?
Yeah.
Like what was happening?
I mean, I think overall I was excited because I felt like we were moving in a positive direction. And it wasn't necessarily about the vaccine in general. It was just like, we're learning about this virus. Because going into it, we had no idea what was causing it. We didn't know how it was spreading or how to treat it. And I'm like, there's so many unknowns and people are dying left and right of all demographics, So to hear that a vaccine was being developed meant that they knew enough about COVID to fight it. And I thought, heck yeah, let's go for it. But then I just started thinking about how quickly they developed it and hearing about, okay, we made this in I think it was 9 months or something like that. I'm not 100% on that. It's been a long time since I've heard about it. But it was very quickly compared to other vaccines.
So how did you come up with that as being a flag? Because to me that was a thing that was sort of like talked about.
It was just thinking about what we thought of vaccines in general, so like the flu shot, for example, that had been around, ever since I came into existence, basically.
Yeah.
And the childhood vaccines have been around forever. So to even think that one was being developed and like a new one, I was like, wow, that's amazing. But then I'm like, yeah, but what are they putting in it? And how did they develop it? Because they had also talked a lot about how we had a whole new approach to this. And I'm like, there's a lot of news, and we're putting that in our bodies, and it's going to stay in there for a while, obviously, because it's going to be a vaccine that's, trying to fight this virus. And so it was just, the flag for me was just the time compared to, this is a new approach, new vaccine, new. And then you compare the time that was used to make it. And I was like, I don't feel like there's been enough research done.
Were you hearing that was something to think about from news sources or through like social media and stuff like that?
I just kept seeing the statistic of, we took a new approach, and here's how long it took to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I was seeing it on Instagram. I saw it on the news. My dad told me. My mom told me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was hearing it from all sides, all views. This is how long it took, and here's what they did.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, so, my thought was like, can they not do a little bit more studying on it before we put it in our bodies? And I always said this joke. I said, I just don't want to like turn on the TV when I'm 60 and go, you may be entitled to compensation if you got this vaccine. Because you think about, you just need time. You need time to study things and to do clinical trials and things like that. And I was just so terrified, even though I didn't know anything about what was going on. I just kept thinking, is that enough time?
Yeah.
Because once it's in our bodies, there ain't any taking it out,
So, I do, and part of why I'm asking that is just because a large part of this is all like how we, because information is changing so rapidly.
Yeah.
Like that's definitely part of how we try and sort through all of that is how we're reacting to it.
Yes.
And so that's my biggest thing is like asking about that.
Yeah.
In the absence of, like long-standing data, like you said, like, being able to say, we've been thinking about this for a decade and here's what's going to happen.
Yes,
which
exactly.
Some people feel better. Just like information in general felt like it was changing pretty rapidly.
Yes, exactly.
And I think by that point, we had in Oklahoma specifically, in southeastern Oklahoma, even more specifically, even though I realized that you were kind of there and kind of in northeastern, we had seen this surge within the state, starting in like November, December, that the hospitals were kind of filling up.
Yes.
And I don't, and since your mom was in healthcare, so I know, it seems like that's also this backdrop of just sort of like the national news, the social media information.
Yeah.
And then sort of like what is happening.
Right. Well, and looking back to again, I keep saying I had no knowledge of how this stuff worked. And I honestly feel like I got to a point where I was like, fight or flight. Like, figure out a way to get through this, however it is. And I think a lot of people did that. And because, our views are different, our brains work differently, everybody's response was a little bit different. But I think we all had that denominator of how do we survive this emotionally and physically, and, for me, it was just, I don't want to put something in my body that isn't safe or that's going to affect me down the road. And I'm hearing, well, what if you can't have kids? What if you can't do this? And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm 18 years old. Like I was so scared to put that in my body, but my mom kept saying, you need to get this vaccine. And so I got it because my mom said that it was okay. And I'm doing fine right now. So,
Did you get your second one as well then?
Yes, but I'm not boosted.
Yeah.
So we're waiting on that for right now. But 2 first shots is where we're at.
Yeah. So that would have been, it seems like, late spring, early summer. Like, that's the sort of time period.
Yeah.
So you're graduating at that point, right? Like, you're graduating high school. You already mentioned that you were on a college trajectory.
Yeah.
That you already felt like that was in your future. So talk to me a little bit about thinking about that transition.
Yeah.
Because we're not, that's also the messaging at that time is we're not out of it, right? Like,
yes.
Like, especially, I think, spring and summer, the numbers were declining nationally and in the state.
They were, yeah. And I remember that being a really big factor in it. Was even my mom was starting to go, okay, like, and I remember her telling me and my dad, like, COVID is not going to impact what college you choose, because that, I mean, if you end up staying there for 4 years, you know, if you don't transfer or whatever, then I mean, like, that's going to be really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And a big thing too was, at the time I was going to play college softball, and so I was also trying to find a way to do that. And during the time period where I had a lot of quarantining going on, a lot of time at home, I decided I wanted to go out of state, really far out of state. And I ended up going to the College of Idaho for my first semester. I signed a letter of intent to play softball there. They said, I actually flew out during slow pitch season for Owasso and tried out, and then flew back to Oklahoma to play slow pitch. So crazy time frame there. But, you know, they said, yeah, you're on the team. And I was really excited. We have family in Idaho as well. So they lived about 30 minutes from the campus. So it was a really good decision. And, you know, my dad was terrified. He was like, oh my gosh, no, you are not doing that. You know, and I'm the oldest. And I was like, oh, no, I'm going. And it was really interesting because they were really big about a liberal way of going about things. And at the time with COVID, liberal and conservative was very different. So at the time, masks were really, really big. And they were like, we're taking this very seriously. So I was like, green flag for me.
You mean
that's
the university?
Fine. Yes, yeah. So for me, even regardless of what my views were, it made me feel better. It made my parents feel better that they were taking it very seriously and being careful. You know, going back to in person completely was the plan, and they were the whole time. So signed to play softball there. It ended up not working out after I got up there. They started quite a bit later than schools in Oklahoma. I found out when I got up there that it just wasn't going to work out because of some scheduling things. So basically I ended up going to school up there and not playing ball. But it was still a wonderful experience, and I really do think that was God's plan to just get me up there. And we had to wear masks the whole time we were there. If we were in a building, if we were outside, we didn't have to wear them. But other than that, I really didn't feel like there was these big restrictions of like, oh, COVID, you know. We got I'd say about every week, got an update of here's what the numbers are, you know, here's what's going on. But it never got to the point where we had to shut down. It's a private school, so they're pretty little as well. So they did a really good job of keeping everything, I think, pretty contained.
What college was that?
It's the College of Idaho in Caldwell. So it's a very small school, about 1,000 students in total.
Yeah.
So.
Yep, that's pretty small.
Mm-hmm.
So they had everything in person. There was nothing virtual then. Is that what I'm hearing?
They had Zoom options. So kind of like they do here still. You know, if you end up getting COVID or if you just get sick, you have a Zoom option to watch the lecture, which was wonderful because, you know, if you just weren't feeling well in general, even if it wasn't COVID, you had the option not to miss lecture. And as college students, you know, we do everything we can not to miss lecture because you get so behind. But it wasn't like, oh, you have to be. It's just, here's an option for you, because there was a lot of contact tracing going on at the time. So, I mean, it was still around, you know. I thankfully never got quarantined. I don't know how. I tried to be careful, but, you know, you don't know who you're sitting next to or if they're sick. But people were quarantined every week. I mean, there was always someone on the Zoom meeting. But it was in-person classes. Zoom is there if you need it, was their approach, which was wonderful. It was great.
So what about the outside of classroom, like social stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Was everything sort of like just, well, I don't know. You tell me like what it was like to try and come up with a social network at that time.
Yeah, so, you know, again, they were really big on trying to be careful with COVID. And because it was a small campus, I think it was a really good setup. Because I feel like there was just a lot more control with the small number of students. And so, you know, I was involved in campus ministry, which was my main thing that I did. And we had Bible study every week and church on Wednesday nights, which was amazing and very therapeutic for me. I needed it. But, you know, masks were worn, things were done. But really the only thing that distinguished it from a normal, you know, couple years ago life is that we wore masks. And I genuinely didn't feel like it was like this, okay, things still feel way different, because by then I didn't care to wear a mask. I didn't even notice it. I wore a cloth mask too. I didn't wear like an N95 or anything like that. But, that was really the only thing. But they did have a very strict vaccination policy. So if you were not fully vaccinated, you had to PCR test every single week on your own time, which was $80 per test, and report that back to the university. And if you didn't, then it was a big deal. Because there was obviously, if there's a religious reason you don't want to get vaccinated, that's fine. And they would say, okay, but you have to get tested every week. So I was vaccinated, so thankfully I did not have to do that, but I did know some people who did, and they did not like it. It was a very difficult thing and very expensive for them. And that's one thing I was like, wow, it's one thing to be like, okay, we're going to be strict about this, but $80 a week for a college student, I mean, my goodness, but, they were really about, look, we are trying to keep the numbers down. You guys want to be in person, so do we. I understood the approach, but it was very expensive for college students,
Yeah.
But other than that, really, which to me, it wasn't a big deal. For some, maybe it was, it was pretty normal for the circumstances beforehand.
Yeah.
So.
Have you ever taken a COVID test?
Oh, yes. I took I think I took 4 whenever I was in Idaho. I got, the sniffles a couple times. There was one time I kind of got a cough and a sore throat, low-grade fever, and I thought, oh, here it goes. Here it is. I have not tested positive to this day, so I've been really lucky. That's not to say I haven't had it. It just wasn't a mild case, because that happens to a lot of teenagers, especially now. But I took quite a few, and they were all the ones that went clear up your nose, and it was just miserable.
I was going to ask you if you remember, like, the first time that you had a COVID test, yeah.
Yeah, well, ironically, so the flu tests are similar as far as getting up there, and I've had a few of those. My mom being a nurse practitioner, they just bring me in the back, swab her, and send her back to school, or wait until the tests come back and then go back to school. So thankfully, I was like, all right, I kind of know what to expect. I want to say the first time I did it was actually precautionary. I want to say it was for softball, maybe to try out for Owasso. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it was more of a precaution than it was, I don't feel good. And it was just uncomfortable, but, I was like, I'm not going to be silly about it. Just be tough and get through it.
Mm-hmm.
Could be worse. At least they're not drawing your blood for every time, sticking a needle in you.
That is one way to look at it. That's true.
Yeah.
It's all on the scale. So you spent that year in university or in college in Idaho. You did get to play softball, which I understand was your original plan.
Yeah.
And seems like you were able to sort of like socialize and do things.
Yeah.
And that masking. Did you feel like there was pressure around masking or like politics around masking on the student level?
I only stayed there one semester, so I definitely felt very out of place. I'm a conservative person, and I'm open about that. And it was a very liberal campus, and I wanted that, and that was part of the reason that I just wanted to leave Oklahoma, was because I felt like, even as a pre-med student, it was very important for my growth as just a person to be able to hear both perspectives in life and be able to deal with it and hear it and move on and have like a civil conversation about it. And because my household is very conservative, I honestly have never been exposed to it, like in a healthy way. We're very open about how we feel about things, but I also went to conservative schools. Both Owasso and Kiowa were conservative. Oklahoma's fairly conservative in general. So I was like, I just felt like it was really important that I get some education that was completely different, because I just feel like that's so important as a person to be able to hear that, because I knew that I wanted to work with people, and what kind of employee would I be if I can't hear somebody else's perspective and go, okay, cool. Like, I don't agree, but let's move on, So I wanted to mature in that sense too. And so when I found out that Idaho was an option, I was like, okay. And they were openly a liberal college. And I remember my dad going, you're getting it over your head. And I was like, I know I am, but I'm going for it, And so by the end of the semester, I was like, okay, I'm ready to go back to Oklahoma. But it was such a perspective change. And I learned, like, we were graded in each class on how we talked about these social and political issues. It was like a part of the rubric. And I've never had that before, but it was such an eye-opener and so, like, useful, because even at OSU, not everybody agrees, you know? So I just felt like I came back from a couple months as like a different person. I was like, no, like I still have the same views. If not, I mean, I think I'm stronger in my views than what I were before, but it's just in my approach and not the judgmental approach that I feel like a lot of people have right now.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that a lot of people feel like, I don't even think it's projecting really, but that politics has been really a dividing point around COVID.
Absolutely.
In general.
Yeah, 100%.
So you spent one semester. I mean, you could say why you chose to come back, or you can just leave it at that. Either way, but maybe talk about the transition. Like, how did you come back, and how did you end up here?
Yeah. So it was, a lot of soul searching in Idaho. Like I said, I felt very out of place as far as I felt like nobody thought even similar to what I did. And that's really hard whenever you're trying to have a conversation day to day. And it's like, I remember one big thing that happened to me was I have a lanyard that has the thin blue line for law enforcement. And I've had it forever. And my keys were on it, my ID. I'll never forget, two of my friends that I was very good friends with in Idaho were like, is that the law enforcement, the police flag? And at the time, we're having some problems with law enforcement and police. And I said, yeah. And they said, you support that? And I was like, yeah, my dad's in law enforcement. Like, I mean, I was just blown away. And they were like, well, not according to this, this, and this of things that were happening on, in the news and everything. And just some stuff was going on. And I was like, how do I not like blow up on these people right now? And so it was real. I mean, it was things, it wasn't just, oh, I don't agree with you. It was like I was being approached because people knew I wasn't from there. Apparently I have an accent, a Southern accent, and they like to point it out. So it was very well known that I was the odd one out. And I was fine with that, but it's very hard because it feels very lonely at times and very like, who do I I called my dad and just rant, here's what's going on, But after that semester and after dealing with, I decided to change my major from pre-med to pre-law, a totally different perspective. But, I did a lot of soul searching and decided that was the best route for me. And so I was going to go to OSU for my first semester of college, and I went to Idaho. So I was like, I'm going to OSU. That's it. I'm not even thinking about any other place but OSU. It's a perfect fit for me. So I called down here. They were amazing. They were like, we'll get you transferred. No worries. Like, you've already been accepted once, so it'll be fine. Got the ball rolling. It was a very easy process. And like in the middle of being a full-time college student, they made it ridiculously easy, which I'm very thankful for because I was doing all the talking on my own because I'm, alone up there. Yeah. My parents can't call for me and I didn't want them to, So they were wonderful, but I went home for Christmas break, moved all my stuff back. We drove 26 hours from Idaho to Oklahoma, me and my mom, and then whenever school started here in January, I was here.
Yeah. So you said that you were thinking about coming here before, like when you were in high school. So why OSU?
Compared to just other places, or
there's a lot of options.
I had toured quite a few schools, and I just felt like OSU had this home feeling about it, and I feel like a lot of people say that, but it's almost just like this comforting feeling when you walk around. Mm-hmm. I feel like I have not met a nicer staff on campus. I have not met one person here that has even had a slightly agitated tone with me, as far as like if I need help or if I can't find something. Everybody's just so friendly, and I feel like OSU has really projected their acceptance toward conservative students, which was something I was trying to find. And I feel like, especially after COVID had happened, I felt like there were some schools in Oklahoma that were starting to shift a little bit more than I would prefer, personally. And I don't feel like OSU is super conservative, but I just feel like they're more accepting of that. And they're not like, oh, you like Donald Trump? Well, you're a bad person. Like they're just like, do what you want to do. Mm-hmm. We're just here to support. Like that was the vibe I always have gotten from OSU. And so I toured some other schools, but then of course the campus here is just gorgeous. So I was like, Then I saw the rooms and everything, and I was like, okay, like, how can I not pick here?
Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, I had no red flags here, like, honestly. And so I was like, I have to go here. And it's a wonderful school. It's amazing.
So what are your majors while you're here?
So I'm English with a concentration in pre-law and a minor in law and legal studies. And I'm also a music industry major. So double majoring at the moment, which is awesome. I love it. So it's been really, really awesome.
And this is your, let me see, what would that have been? This is your
my second semester of my freshman year. Yeah.
In my head, it was all there, but when we were talking about high school, I was like, wait, how far back did that go?
It's so easy to get mixed up. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Talking about it, especially looking back, I'm like, it's all a blur.
Well, and at this point, this is April, so you're almost all the way through your first full semester here at OSU.
Yes.
So, I mean, how has it been shifting coming back here? Because Stillwater is different than McAllister.
Oh, totally.
And as far as, like, you know, how some of the messaging and stuff and how just, you know that. But it also sounds like it's very different from where you are at Idaho.
Oh, absolutely. So, night and day, for sure.
So you've lived in, like, these very different parts in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Actually, you've lived several different parts in the last 2 years during the course of this pandemic.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if you've thought much about, like, comparison. Like, do they all feel like, well, anyway, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. So I, you know, again, in Idaho, I knew that it was going to be hard. And that was the thing, was I went in there with the mindset, like, this is not going to be the most pleasant experience, but you need it as a person that is a new adult. And my outlook was not, I'm going to stay for one semester. I just thought, you know what, you have the option to transfer. And my parents were very supportive about, look, we support the fact that you want to go out and do something. Like, that takes guts. So if you want to come back, it's fine. Like, just know that. And so their support, too, was big with that. But I just didn't feel at home again until I was back here. And I think that OSU is a big part of that. I don't think it's just being in Oklahoma. But, you know, I mean, it's things like I don't have to be scared about talking about what I saw on the news, you know, in my room with my roommates. Or, you know, I walk to class and I see somebody with a, you know, pickup truck and a cut off sleeves and you got the flags in the back. And, you know, it's just, I feel like I'm in my environment now. And that matters so much whenever you're in college. I mean, you're alone. You are living on your own. You're an adult. So it's like, why not surround yourself with very similar people? And that was kind of the plan eventually. You know, I didn't want to stay in Idaho like forever. I plan to come back eventually, sooner than what I was thinking, but my patience was thin at that point, and I thought, you know what? I saw what I needed to see. So, but I'm just so much happier here, and it's just a much more comforting feeling, and much more I belong, and I feel home.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm 2.5 hours from my family. And, you know, everybody has a different outlook on college and, oh, well, you shouldn't be going home all the time. And I don't go home all the time. But, you know, you don't get that back, you know. And I missed a lot whenever I was in Idaho that really bothered me. And so I thought, you know, what am I trying to prove here? You know, it's important that you spend time with your family while it lasts, because it's not going to last forever. And so it's been really nice. I'm far enough away that I'm not like 10 minutes from my house, but, you know, I also have them if I need them. And I don't know, it's just, it's like night and day. I just feel so much more comfortable.
So how is that, bringing that back to like the COVID question, like coming to OSU at this point, like how do you feel about the messaging and COVID protocol and sort of like how the universities still handling this? Yeah,
so I actually bragged on you guys like yesterday to my dad, because I have felt like the messaging with like masking and COVID numbers and everything has been top tier compared to anywhere else I've been. Like high school, college, you name it. Like I feel like the emails are like right on the money. It's like a, you know, you know when to expect them, and they're very informative. And I just feel like communication is really good here. And I also feel like the professors do a really good job about referring back. Like all my professors, like, all right, just so you know, we're still in a time where masks are required in the classroom. But if we go 2 weeks without a positive test, we can take the masks off. Like all of my professors have been really good about communicating to. So I feel like that's a big factor in it as well, is that the professors do just as good of a job as OSU in general. So I'm hearing it all the time. And so I've never felt like I'm like, what's going on? I've never felt like that here, and I can't say that about anywhere else. So I've been really impressed, especially with how big of a college it is, you know?
So do you feel pressure one way or the other here for like masking or for like you said, like the booster question?
Yeah, you know, I feel like here people are more aware of not to talk about it, because I think we've gotten to a point where it's like you're beating a dead horse either way. Like, we're all adults, you know, we've got our view on it. COVID's been around for how long now? You know, not something that we should really be talking a lot about. But I also feel like the way that OSU has handled masking has been really smart and like just like logical, like, you know, the whole like 2-week thing, and now not required because numbers are like crazy low. And so I haven't felt pressure really in any way, but again, I do feel like because I came from somewhere that was so on the other end of the spectrum, that even if there was pressure, I probably wouldn't even notice, because in Idaho, I mean, like, I literally had to just be quiet. I mean, I was afraid to talk about really anything in my personal life because I didn't want to offend anybody. But I had never been in an environment where I couldn't be like, oh yeah, today I went out and shot my gun. They're like, you shoot guns? And like, some people are not pro-gun, you know, not pro-Second Amendment. So I mean, it's things that a part of my everyday life that I can't talk about anymore. So, and it was really good for me though, because I needed to learn how to deal with it. But I feel like here, because I've had that experience, I don't think even if there was pressure, I would notice, honestly. So
yeah, with different levels of requirements. So I think I just have like really one more question.
Yeah,
and
sure.
This is sometimes like a weird thing to ask about, but I think it's good to be reflective.
No, for sure.
So if we're doing this project so we can think like way into the future, so we can look back and be like, what the heck was going on, right? Like, what happened? So if you had something that you wanted like your 50 years from now self to be like, you know, like thinking about like what happened now and what you think maybe would have been better or different with that hindsight.
Yeah, like what I would, you know, be like, hey, don't do this. Or
this. Like, what would you want to tell either people making policy or public health decisions or you yourself, like later on in the future? Yeah.
Okay, well, first of all, I would say your best friend is going to be knowing what is reliable and what's not. Learn how to find a reliable source. Because I just remember thinking, I don't know who or what to trust. And that was with my parents, that was with the news, that was with social media. I mean, and it got to a point where it's like, do I trust the CDC? Do I trust WHO? Like, I mean, I remember just being terrified going, who do I trust, you know? I mean, and so I think the biggest thing is just go figure out how to find a reliable source and do some digging before you believe anything from anybody or anything. And just live your life without any regrets. Do whatever you want to do. Go wherever you want to go. I'm very proud of the fact that I went to Idaho, even though I came back. I would have been kicking myself if I didn't go, even in the time of COVID, you know. But just do what you want to do and go live whenever you can, because you just don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, you know. And as cheesy as that sounds, like, it's just everything's put into perspective whenever everything's taken away from you, like that, you know. And again, as somebody who played ball and who was involved in music and, you know, was very involved in the community too, it really was rough on me for a while. And, you know, and then too, just to lean on your faith, which is a very personal preference, but that's the only thing that got me through it.
So if you were talking to policy makers in the future and you're you know, like, one of your struggles you're identifying is not being able to understand like what is reliable information, like, what would you think would be a better way that like politicians and policymakers and public health experts that are trying to make those messages, like, what do you think would be a better way to find a solution?
And this was this is an opinion, obviously, but I felt like during the time when things were just coming out day after day, I felt like people were saying things too quickly. I felt like they weren't giving it time to, like, okay, is this really true, or is this just a rumor that we heard? But I feel like because we were in such a time of panic and just like we were just unsure of everything, that people were so quick to just start saying stuff about, oh, COVID's doing this now, or it's spread here, or the vaccine doesn't work, or it does work. It's like, stop being so quick with what you're saying, because people are freaking out, And so I just remember, like, looking back especially, there were things that were said that were completely false, that we, like, know for a fact are false. And that's with, either how COVID spreads or something like that, stuff that we know for sure now. And it's like, if people would have just given it some time and quit being so quick to just say stuff on the news because we want to say it as a news source, especially, and politicians, give it some time.
Yeah.
Figure out what's true and what's not yourselves before you spread it to people who are depending on you.
Can you think of other examples of that? Like I know that we didn't know early on like how it spread, and that's why it was like, cover everything and stay away because we don't know.
Yeah, I remember one thing, and I still hear controversy about this, but one of the big things was the vaccine causes infertility. And I remember seeing that on the news, and they were like, it does for sure. And I'm like, and I'm watching it going, I just got my second shot. And I remember like getting teary-eyed thinking, all I've ever wanted is a family. So, I'm sitting there terrified. And then...
Did you hear that on Fox News? Is that what it was? Or was it
gosh, I don't know. I want to say I heard it through a speech of some sort.
That's okay. I'm just
no, you're fine. I wish I could remember exactly. I want to say I saw it on Fox News, but they weren't the one reporting it. It was like they were showing a speech of somebody else.
Right.
But it's just, looking back, like, it was just so terrifying. And I kind of feel like we're at the mercy of our news sources and our politicians in a way. Like, we have a democracy, but it's like, we do have people that are out and speaking and, are in the public eye. And it's like, you can't just be saying things just because you heard it, from so-and-so over there. Like, and then now we're looking at studies and they're like, we're not seeing any linkage to that. And then women are coming out going, well, I just got vaccinated and now I'm pregnant. So, like, it's like we really can't find any evidence there that's like hardcore, like, for sure. Now, that's not to say from woman to woman something won't happen. Not everything's 100%. But it was just something of like, people were so dead set on certain things that were a really big deal. And you have people at home going, well, this is all I know to watch, so I guess they're right. And I think that's what caused a lot of like division in houses even, it was like nobody knew what to trust. Even my mom and dad, I mean, looking at it now, they both admit, look, we trusted things that we shouldn't have. And we just were too dependent on things at times because that was all we knew. And so, we have the takeaway of figure out what's reliable on your own. Don't trust anything first. You do it yourself. And that way you know for a fact what you're looking at, big picture. But, I mean, and that's a great lesson to learn. Hard way to learn it, but it's a good lesson to learn,
Information sourcing is always hard, right?
Well, and the honors classes I'm taking right now, they're wonderful about that. I mean, reliable sources, it's so important, like, Yeah.
Well, this has actually been really interesting and really helpful, and I'm really glad that you were willing to talk with me.
Oh my gosh, it's literally an honor. I was just like so excited when I got the email. I really appreciate it.
Well, good. Is there anything that I didn't ask you or that you didn't feel like you got the chance to talk about that you want to say?
Goodness, no. I think you covered about every aspect of my life, I think. Which is perfect. I'm glad that I could share. I'm glad that I could share it. I really do.
I tried to leave you some private spaces. But no.
It was great.